So people often debate whether the Bible is true, but they fail to consider whether it's valuable. I love debate for educational purposes, for entertainment purposes. I like it because it's thought provoking and challenging. So I'll debate whether the Bible's true, whether or not it teaches good things, etc. But I think people often fail to consider whether or not the Bible is valuable, and I think that that should be of higher consideration than whether or not it's true. I do think it's important whether or not it's true, but I think it's more important whether or not the Bible's valuable. Now, somebody might ask, they might say, James, how could the Bible be valuable if it's just fiction? And I think that's a great and fair question. And I'm going to demonstrate how fiction can be very valuable. Okay. So, in order to do this, I'm going to start in the Marvel Universe. And I want to consider Peter Parker, specifically the Peter Parker that's acted by Tobey Maguire, just so that way we know which movie we're referencing. Now, it all boils down to how the writer, if it's a book, or the movie producer is wanting to present it. Do they want to present this as an action video? Do they want it to be an inspirational video? What are they going for? Well, in this movie, there was a lot of focus, and I really appreciated it for this reason. It's one of my favorite movies. But the producer, there's a lot of focus on Peter Parker and the decision that he has to make. Now, in this movie, Peter Parker, all he wants is MJ. He's just infatuated with her. She's pretty, she's kind, she's sweet, they're friends, he's a boy, she's a girl, perfectly innocent. All he wants is MJ. It's just that simple. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then he gets this power. And he has to make an awful decision. He has to decide, do I give up MJ to help the people that can't help themselves? Or do I hang on to MJ and close my eyes to the people that are suffering, that are being murdered? Just close my eyes to all that and take what I want. And that's a very hard decision for him because he really loves MJ. But he's faced with this decision, and he realizes that, and I know people make fun of this line, but that with the great power that he has comes a great responsibility. And he decides to let go of everything that he wants. He just wants to be with MJ. He lets all that go so he can help those who can't help themselves. So he can be the person that's going to save them when they're getting robbed, when they're about to be shot. So he can prevent death of innocent people. He gives up everything that he wants to do what's right. And I really appreciate the movie producer and how they did this, but they made that the focus of the movie instead of it just being on action. I mean, I guess action's fine, but I don't really care so much for the action as I do for the values that are being promoted in the movie. It's very powerful. I love that movie. And it's very touching. And I'm going to give you some more examples, but the thing is when you watch these things, they reach deep into your heart and they strike you with conviction. And you're like, and you know, because you're convicted, I should be like this. I should be like Peter Parker. I should put responsibility and duty and helping others who cannot help themselves before what I want for myself. Even if we're unwilling to actually do it, we know we should be that way. And that's very powerful. Let's go on to another example in the Marvel Universe, Steve Rogers. Steve Rogers is with his comrades. They're out training or whatever. or standing in line, whatnot. And a grenade with a spoon pulled hits the ground in front of them, and somebody cries, "Grenade." And Steve Rogers, his instinct reaction, like, there's no time to think about anything. Like, these bombs, the grenades go off, like, I think you have 2 seconds after you pull that spoon, and that's it. Maybe 2.5, 3. This spoon gets pulled, it's on the ground. The first thing he does is jump on the grenade. And he yells to everybody, "Get back!" And then he hugs this grenade on the ground. Because he is more concerned about the well-being of those around him than he is his own life. He wants to protect those who are weak, those who are misfortunate, and he's willing to let go of everything to help other people. And so even though the commander just pulled a fake and threw it on the ground as a test their reaction for training purposes, whatever, they didn't know that. He jumps on this grenade to absorb the damage that he was afraid everybody else would take. And it would have killed him. But he did it anyway. Because that's who he was. That's what he valued. And when you watch this, you know you should be that guy. Even if you won't be that guy, you know you should. And that's powerful. Let's go over to DC. Steve Trevor. Steve Trevor is a spy. You could argue that he was doing it for money. But when it came right down to it, he blew himself up in a plane of poisonous gas to save countless lives. And he knew he was going to die. He knew he was going to die, but he did it anyway. Because he was trying to prevent innocent people from dying. He was trying to end a war that shouldn't have started. And it's hard to watch these scenes, even though they're all fake in Hollywood. But when you're watching it, you're not registering all that. You're absorbing the story. And it's hard to watch these things because they're so heart-wrenching. But once again, you know you should be like him, right? Now, this next example is probably one of the most difficult to absorb. Clark Kent, or Kal-El, if you will. I believe he's reckoned to be 16, 17, somewhere in that age. And there's a tornado. And his dad gets stuck between a car or under a car or something. I think his leg gets broke. And he's stuck there. And he's not going to make it. At least on his own. Now, Clark can totally get his dad out of this fix. It's like nothing for Clark to pull this off. And so he's just waiting for the signal from his dad. Hey, you let me know. I'm going to come get you out of there. But his dad, albeit it wasn't his real dad, is the only dad he had ever known. But his dad was like, no. He signaled to him, because they were a bit of a distance. He signaled, he's like, you have to let me die. And it's okay. And the reason that he had determined that this was the right thing to do is because there was people watching. And he had thought about this. And he had even talked with Clark about it. He's like, if people know who you are, if they see what you can do, I don't think they're ready for it. I don't think they'll react properly to it. And right now, we need to keep this low toned. It needs to stay a secret because it's not time yet. He was looking out for the greater good of Clark, but also ultimately of everyone on Earth. And so, he believed so much that this was the right thing to do that he made a horrible decision. Well, not a horrible decision, but a terrible decision to sacrifice his own life. And not only that, but this was going to be hard on Clark too, and he knew that. But he's like, you have to let me die, and it's okay because this is the right thing to do. Everything will be fine. This all gets communicated in a glance and a wave of the hand, but Clark lets his dad die in effort to, because he believed in his dad, he trusted his dad, and he wanted to do what was right. And that's very hard to watch. But when we look at this once again, we know that there's greater things that we're dealing with here than just an action movie. There's something about this that really speaks to us as humans and reaches into our hearts and drives conviction. And changes, if we'll allow it, it changes who we are. Now let's go to Middle Earth. Sorry, I'm taking a little time with this. I'm not sorry. I think these things are worthy of reflection, and they're going to make my point very well here in the end. So this is the demonstration. Middle Earth, Gandalf, considered one of the greatest scenes in cinematic history. Here you have Gandalf. He's with the Fellowship. They're in the mines of Moria. And they eventually the Balrog approaches, and Gandalf knows that none of them really stand any chance against the Balrog. He says swords are of no use here, and he concludes that the only thing they can really do is to run. And they were trying to make it to the bridge of Khazad-dûm, or Khazad-dûm, or however you pronounce it in Dwarvish or Elvish, whatever it is. And they're trying to make it to this bridge so they can escape. Meanwhile, the Balrog's hot on their tail. Well, eventually, they get to this narrow bridge. The whole Fellowship is crossing. Gandalf's staying at the back of the line, making sure everybody makes it. That's why he's at the back, right? Same reason that Wolves, the leader, will stay at the back, make sure everybody makes it. Gandalf's staying at the back to make sure the whole Fellowship makes it across the bridge, and in the process, the Balrog approaches, and he has to turn around and face it on the bridge. Bridge is 1.5 feet wide, maybe 2 feet. I don't know. And he faces off with a Balrog. The famous words, "You shall not pass," and he strikes the ground with his staff. And or he strikes the bridge with his staff, which weakens the bridge, and the Balrog ends up falling with the bridge down into oblivion, ultimately. But in the process, Gandalf gets caught in the Balrog's fiery whip, loses his footing, and he largely falls off the edge of the bridge as well. But he catches himself, and he's trying hard to pull himself up while the entire Fellowship is watching. He's trying hard to pull himself up, but he can't do it, and he realizes he's not going to make it. And then he looks over at the Fellowship, who he was trying to make sure made it across the bridge, and he says 3 words to them. He says, "Fly, you fools." In other words, run, get out of here. It's your only hope. It might sound like Gandalf is being a bit of a jerk there, calling them fools, but really that wasn't the case, and everybody knows it. Really, what he was doing is he was looking out for them, and his last words to them before he also falls into oblivion was looking out for them. Run. He was concerned about them. That was his concern. And then he fell off into oblivion. Very heart-wrenching scene, very hard to watch, and the movie producer, I can't remember his name, but yeah, they did a very good job with this scene, and all the other movie producers with the scenes that I've mentioned, and many other movies with other scenes also, in reaching into the hearts of the audience and helping us realize that there's bigger things out there than whether or not we got the sandwich that we wanted at lunch or whatever we make a big deal about today. And but again, once again, we know we should all be like Gandalf, staying at the back of the line, making sure everybody makes it, making whatever sacrifice necessary. I think Gandalf is many people's hero for many different reasons, but this being one of the big ones. Now let's go to Star Wars. I like Star Wars. A lot of people like Star Wars. It's very weird when you find somebody who doesn't know what Star Wars is. Kanan Jarrus. I think a lot of Star Wars is action, but which made it harder for me to come up with an example of a sacrifice for the good of others example. But Kanan Jarrus, if you watch the Clone Wars, the CGI version, Kanan Jarrus sacrifices himself in a massive explosion to save the Phoenix Cell. Now, the Phoenix Cell was there on a mission to interrupt or destroy or sabotage the development of the TIE Defender, because the TIE Defender would enable the Separatists, or the bad guys, wherever you want to call them, the bad guys, right? To make if they got a hold of this TIE Defender and they were able to mass produce this thing, it was going to be a big problem for the Republic. It would utterly crush them out, because this thing had powerful shields and was just better than the regular TIE fighters in every way. And they would just wipe them out. It's way too powerful of a weapon. And it was Admiral Thrawn's project. But the Phoenix Cell gets in there because they're going to sabotage this, because they're trying to... I mean, I know this is war, but they weren't doing it for themselves out of boredom. Maybe Zeb might have been doing it out of boredom. But these people were fighting for a greater cause. They were trying to protect innocent people and the destruction of countless lives by the Separatist army, or not even the Separatists at this point. I'm sorry, it's the Empire at this point. And so they get in there and they try to sabotage this thing, and in the process, in their escape, it is the fuel tank that they're parked by, or they're making their escape at, is intentionally shot, because in blowing it up, it will wipe out the Phoenix Squadron, who had been sabotaging a lot of their stuff and interfering with the Empire's affairs. And so they really wanted to take these guys out. So they shot at their own fuel tank, which was critical for the development of the TIE Defender, to take out the Phoenix Squadron. A very nasty way of playing, but I understand why they did it. And Kanan Jarrus holds back the explosion with the Force to save the cell, to save the Phoenix Cell. His wife, Hera Syndulla, and all the rest of the characters. He sacrificed, he gives his life to give them enough time to escape. And it's very hard to watch these scenes, especially after you've seen these characters, know who they are, come to love them. It's very hard to watch this, because this is a real sacrifice. But Kanan Jarrus, he sacrifices himself, and Hera loses it. I've never seen And I know that it's CGI, and I know it's all fake and fiction, but the flesh basically melts off of her face. It's hard to explain the horror that she was experiencing in witnessing Kanan sacrifice himself to save her and the cell. But we value Kanan Jarrus, and we appreciate him, and we honor him for his bravery, for his sacrifice. And these are very touching and deep scenes. Now, so far, I'm going to end with Kanan Jarrus there. So far, we've addressed hero sacrifices. And when we see these sacrifices, they do all the things that I say. They really reach into our hearts, the hearts of the audience. They drive conviction that we should be like this. This is noble. This is who I ought to be. And if we let it, this fiction can change our lives for the good. And we know that it can. But there are other valuable lessons from fiction, right? Such as not giving up, lessons of working together, lessons in trust. I want to bring up Ahsoka Tano because she's my favorite Star Wars character. Here you can learn a lot of lessons from her story, specifically a certain segment of her story in Star Wars Clone Wars. But the value of reflection. Ahsoka Tano was not comfortable just obeying the Jedi Council. Like, she was not. At first, when she was younger and whatever, she did. But as she went along, she's like, something's not right. Something's not right. Something's not right. And instead of just dismissing that, she allowed that to live. She allowed that to breathe. She didn't snuff out that inner conviction, intuition, whatever. And she needed to know that what she was obeying should be obeyed. I think that's a very important lesson that a lot of people would do well to learn today. But she needed to know that what she was obeying and the orders she was following was something she should actually do. She had a problem with the Jedi Council just serving the Chancellor and doing what he says to keep the peace. And that's what the Jedi Council was there for. Like, the Jedi Order, they were peacekeepers, right? But which is good. There's nothing wrong with being a peacekeeper. But Ahsoka, she was sharp. She was keen, and she realized that it's more important to do what's right than to keep the peace. And as much as she wanted to keep the peace, she saw that keeping the peace might mean that she had to do something wrong. Something that she wasn't sure she should be doing. And we see that she was right in all of her intuition and convictions once we realized who the Chancellor was, right? But because she was different in this way, concerning herself with what was right, making sure that what she was obeying should be obeyed, and such things, this made her an outcast. It made her different, and but she wasn't serving the Sith Lord anymore, and she went through a horrible, horrible betrayal. She was framed for a murder, and even the Jedi Council, they judged her guilty of it, which shocked her. The Jedi Council turned her over to the Empire to be judged, and they sentenced her to death. I don't know if it was by firing squad, probably. I think that's how the Empire did it. And this is all very horrible. And were it not for her best friend, Anakin Skywalker, personally taking upon himself to investigate and figure out what was really going on, the Jedi Council would have stood there and let her be executed for a crime she didn't commit. And I understand that the Jedi Council was confused, and it was hard to trust people. It was hard to know what to do. And she was framed really well. But that betrayal, she's like, mm-mm. She's like, I already knew that something was fishy here, and you guys almost had me executed. You just turned me over. She's like, she left the Jedi Order. She was no longer officially a Jedi, she was a Force wielder. But there's a lot of lessons. My reason for mentioning Ahsoka Tano and all this, there's a lot of lessons you can learn from this fiction. Fiction. Lessons about trust, lessons about betrayal, lessons about making sure that you're actually obeying the right orders. Like, should I do this? I know it sounds good, but should I? Should I? And so you can learn a lot of lessons from these things. And I hope that people that watch these actually learn the lessons, you know, because if they don't, I guess it's a cool story and it's entertaining, but why not learn something from it? Like the lessons are literally there, powerfully and glaringly taught and emphasized. I would learn that stuff. I had one guy tell me recently, he's like, why would you change your life based off fiction? That's just dumb. I'm like, why wouldn't you? Makes perfect sense to me. In fact, the thing is about real life is that it's messy. And if you're going to learn a lesson from real life, it's harder to learn that lesson because life is so messy. But in fiction, whoever's writing it, the author of the fiction, the movie producer, they have the ability, the power to manipulate the story in any way that they want so that they can drive home that lessons perfectly, clearly, concisely, and with a lot of power. That real life might be harder to drive that lesson home because it's just so messy. In fiction, it can be very clean. And so fiction is often, I think, not always, I don't even want to say most, but it is often more effective at teaching valuable lessons than real life. So just to make that point. Now let's go back to the Bible. We've talked a lot about fiction. I hope that I think that I've well demonstrated by this point that fiction is valuable. Okay, even though it's all fake, it's valuable. The examples that I gave you here of Kanan Jarrus, Gandalf, Clark Kent, Steve Trevor, Steve Rogers, Peter Parker. When you watch these things, they really do strike into the hearts of the audience and drive the conviction that you should be like Peter Parker, and you know it. You should be like Gandalf, and you know it. And why do you value Gandalf anyway? Well, a lot of people value him for different reasons, but he's a good dude. He genuinely cares, and he's willing, you want him on your side because you know he's got your back, and he's going to sacrifice his own life to protect you if necessary. You want that around, and you know you should be that way too, even though Gandalf is fake. Okay? Even though he's fake. All right. So let's go back to the Bible, because that's where we started. We started all this with people debate whether or not the Bible is true, but they fail to consider whether or not it's valuable. And people are like, well, how can it be valuable if it's all fake? Well, I just demonstrated to you how it's valuable. Okay, so hopefully you were able to see that very clearly. I think I did a marvelous job. So going back to the Bible, even if it's fiction, even if the Bible's fiction, it's still valuable. It still teaches a lot of powerful lessons. And so forth. Okay, so even if Jesus is fake, you should be like him. For the same reason that even though Gandalf and Peter Parker and Clark Kent are fake, you should be like them. Right? Right? So I understand that it matters whether or not the Bible's true. That's a question that matters to me. But after all those debates are had as to whether or not the Bible's true and all this stuff, and you sweep all that off the desk, the reality is that even if it's just fiction, it's still valuable, and you should still be like Jesus. Okay. And I even know an atheist who said that he loves Jesus. He's like, I don't know if he existed, and I don't believe in God, but he's like, I love Jesus. And he agrees, as far as I was able to tell, that people should be like Jesus. He gets the value of fiction. He might not think about it in those terms, but, it's there. It's there. So even if God is fake, he should still be worshipped. I'm going to explain why. I don't want to get into the definition of the word worship right now, but basically it's prioritizing. It's basically what your highest priority is. That's what you worship. It's your highest priority. What you demonstrate as your highest priority is that's what you worship. Okay. Well, ultimate goodness should be your highest priority. So if God is ultimately good, even as a fictional character, you should worship him because that's ultimate goodness. Now, I want to deal with two objections to this. One is that people will be like, well, but if you look in the Bible, God is actually bad because if I interpret it this way, okay, that's great. I understand that argument, but for what I'm saying here, that's a non sequitur because we can disagree about the interpretation, but my claim is, and the Bible claims him out to be, even though you may disagree with some of the things that he does, the Bible claims that he's ultimate goodness. So you should be like that. And there's no arguing that. And I think you know that. Okay. Nothing else makes sense than to prioritize ultimate goodness. I think that's just... Okay, let's deal with the second objection. Some people might argue, well, why not just worship the goodness, the ultimate goodness, and not the God? Well, that makes sense, but here's the thing. The claim is that God is the embodiment of ultimate goodness. Okay? If God lost the ultimate goodness part, we would not worship him. You could be all-powerful and all-knowing and still be a jerk, right? You could still be a tyrant, but it's because he's all good that we worship him, okay? If you got rid of the goodness part, you wouldn't worship him. It's the same reason that we honor soldiers. We're not honoring these soldiers because they're people. We're honoring them for their bravery and their courage and their sacrifice. Because you know what? If they weren't brave and they weren't courageous and instead they were just cowards that made no sacrifice, would we be honoring them? No. So the whole reason that we worship God or honor God or respect God, whatever words you want to use, is because of those qualities. Once you remove those qualities, there's no, why would you worship him, right? So God is the embodiment of those of ultimate goodness, meaning that if ultimate goodness were a person, it's God or it's Jesus, okay? And so yeah, you should worship him. Now, if somebody wants to argue, well, hey, I'm just going to worship ultimate goodness. I don't see why a being needs to be involved at all, whether it's God or Jesus or any. He's like, I don't understand. Okay, fine. That's great. Worship ultimate goodness. Prioritize and make your highest priority ultimate goodness. That's the requirement of the kingdom of heaven. So I don't have a problem with that. I think you'll be wrong about, not worshiping God or acknowledging he exists. Sure. But again, there is value in fiction, okay? There is lots of value in fiction. You can learn powerful lessons from fiction, lessons that will strike your heart with conviction. Just the same reasons that you should be like Peter Parker and Gandalf and Clark Kent and Ahsoka Tano. The reasons that you should be like these characters are the same reasons you should be like Jesus. The same reason, even though all these characters are fake. Okay? Now, I believe Jesus is real. I believe the Bible's true. I do believe that. But even if it weren't, I would still revolve my life around living like Jesus and worshiping God. So, and that is a very strong, I'm just going to go ahead and close with this thought, but that is a very strong position to take because, see, people look at me and they're like, James, the reasons for you believing things are different and they don't make sense. You should believe the Bible because of prophecy, or you should believe the Bible because of this, or you should believe the Bible, or you should be a Christian because, and I'm like, those might be the reasons that you do it. Those aren't my reasons. I think if a person can look at the evidence and be like, you know what, and honestly say, as I do, honestly, it could be argued either way that the Bible's fake, it's true, that God's real or exists or doesn't. If somebody could just come in and say, here's the hard evidence of it, and end the discussion and end the debate, I'm sure it would have been done, but it's not happened yet. I know that there's people that really believe that they've got the evidence. I'm not saying that they haven't or haven't done that or don't think that. But when you look at it, there is room for doubt. I get that. I understand that. I acknowledge that. And Christians be like, well, but James, like, now hold on now. Christians are supposed to be intellectually honest. I'm being intellectually honest. That would make me more Christian than you if you're not intellectually honest. And in my intellectual honesty, I conclude, or I can see and admit and acknowledge that there's sufficient room for doubt. There's room for doubt. Maybe not. I don't want to use the word sufficient because that's a funny word. There's no way to measure that. But there's room for doubt, okay? There's plenty of room for doubt. Let me say it that way. So, having everything laid out for me, there's reason to believe, there's reason to not. Let's just pick a number and say it's 50-50. I look at it and I say, even if it's all fake, I ought to live this way. And I know I'm right. And how is anybody going to take that away from me? They can't. Okay, let's say you say, okay, great. You come in, let's say you have the evidence that convinces me the Bible's wrong. Okay, that's nice. So, if it's wrong, so what does that change? The reality is, you should still prioritize ultimate goodness. You should still be like Jesus and Peter Parker and so forth. I just find that Jesus takes all of the ultimate qualities of self-sacrificial love and patience and mercy and compassion, all the virtues, and they're encapsulated into one being. A guy who spends every day healing people. They come to him from sun up to sundown. He heals them all. He helps them all. He teaches them all. He feeds them all. He that's what he does with his life every day for 3 years during his years of ministry. And then he dies for them all, even if it's all fake. We all know we should be like that. Or at least I certainly hope so. I don't want to assume that everybody knows something. Somebody will get on me for that. But I would certainly hope that we could agree we should all be like Jesus. So that's what I wanted to share with you, my friends. There is tons of value in fiction. And this is one thing that bugs me. I'm getting a little ranty. It bugs me when I've got Christians that will attack fiction. They'll attack fictional books, or they'll attack fictional movies or whatever. I can understand there's a lot of fiction that's just pure garbage. I'm not arguing that. There is. In fact, I think it's worse than garbage. I think it's poisonous and destructive. Okay? But it's not because it's fiction. It's because what they're presenting. But if you have fiction that's presenting valuable lessons about truth and sacrifice and virtues and goodness and who you ought to be, and you're attacking it, I just think you're stupid. I'm not trying to be mean. I just think that you have misplaced values on things. But I have had Christians be like, oh, you believe in Star Wars. I'm like, well, I don't even know what it means to believe in Star Wars. We all acknowledge that it's fiction. Oh, but you must value the sentiments that it promotes. I'm like, well, do you value all? I mean, sure, some of them, yeah, but do you value all the sentiments presented in the Bible? There's a lot of murder and evil in there. No, you're valuing the valuable ones, the good ones. Duh. I'm doing the same thing with the fiction. Anyways, fiction is valuable. Hope you guys learned something. I enjoyed that. Let me know what you guys think. If you're interested in coming on my show and debating me, or just having a friendly discussion and we can figure something out together, or if you want to play apologetic mock trials where we both agree, but one of us is just playing devil's advocate for the fun, educational, thought-provoking purposes of it, then message me and let's get into it. Thank you, my friends, and we'll see you again later.